Welcome back. We pick back up. Chapter 1, The History of the Fraternitas Saturni, Part 2. The Ordo Templi Orientis and Aleister Crowley. Less mysterious, but still quite obscure, was the early work of Theodor Roos, a half-German, half-English, sometime singer, press agent, language teacher, and spy, who is said to have attempted to revive the Order of Illuminati in Bavaria in 1880. This late 19th century form of Illusionism would appear to have no direct connection to the order founded by Adam Weishaupt 100 years before. There were actually two new latter-day orders of Illuminati, one headed by Roos and the other by Leopold Engel in Dresden. By 1899, the two orders were unified, but they only worked together until 1902. After that, Roos shifted his emphasis toward aiding in the development of another order, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or O2O. Engel continued with his branch of the order until 1924, and then founded yet another Illuminati group, the World League of the Illuminati, in 1927. This new order lasted until 1933, 2 years after Engel's death. After abandoning his efforts to revive Bavarian Illuminism, Theodor Roos devoted himself to quasi-Masonic work that would culminate in the OTO. Roos edited a journal called the Oriflamme from 1902 to the 1923. This was a general outlet for various orders and lodges founded by Roos. It was dedicated to an eclectic synthesis of Masonic, Rosicrucian, Templar, and Gnostic ideas, together with certain forms of Indian occultism. Roos bought the charters of two Masonic organizations, the Ancient Primitive Rite of Memphis and the Egyptian Rite of Mizraim, from an English Mason named John Yarker. These two groups were unified by Roos in 1902 and called it the Ancient and Primitive Rite of Memphis and Mizraim. Working with Roos at the time were the well-known theosophists Franz Hartmann and another occult figure named Joshua, also called Heinrich Klein. Hartmann had been acquainted with Karl Kellner, the founder of the OTO, since at least 1886, when the two collaborated on a form of inhalation therapy for tuberculosis based on Kellner's process of manufacturing cellulose. Klein ran a utopian colony in Upper Bavaria called Blessings of the Earth, which he established after inheriting 500,000 marks. All three men, Roos, Hartmann, and Klein, were at one time or one another involved with the progressive underground utopian colony near Escanza, Switzerland, called Monte Verita. In its earliest phase, the OTO was originally developed by a wealthy Viennese industrialist and high-grade Freemason named Karl Kellner. It began about 1896, but no documentation of it exists before it was mentioned in the Historique Archive de Oriflamme. It was sometime between 1896 and 1904 that Roos, Hartmann, and Klein began to collaborate with Kellner in their collective quasi-Masonic endeavors. Kellner had apparently already developed a system of sexual occultism based on what Indian Tantrism he was able to learn, and on the teachings of the American sexual mystic Pascal Beverly Randolph, as transmitted through a French branch of Randolph's organization. Traditionally, Kellner is supposed to have traveled in the East, where he learned sexo-yogic secrets from 3 Eps, 2 of them Hindu and 1 Muslim. Shortly after collaboration among Kellner, Roos, and Hartmann and Klein began, Kellner died, and Roos became the order head of the OTO. His magical bynames within the order were Frater Merlin and Frater Peregrinus. Under Roos, the OTO flourished as it never had before. In 1912, Roos openly published the true nature of the work of the OTO in Oriflamme. Quote, "Our order possesses the key which opens all Masonic and Hermetic secrets, namely the teaching of sexual magic, and this teaching explains, without exception, all the secrets of Freemasonry and all systems of religion." End quote. Also in that same year, Roos met the English magician Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed Great Beast, to whom Roos supposedly accused of revealing the order's secrets of sexual magic. In fact, Crowley knew little about the techniques Roos was alluding to, but Crowley's works are so full of sexual references that it seemed to Roos that he did. A sort of mutual conversation took place in which Roos convinced Crowley of the power of the OTO's sexual magical technology, and Crowley reverted Roos to his Ionic law of Thelema. In 1922, Roos resigned his position in the OTO due to poor health and nominated Crowley as his successor. Roos died the next year. Crowley was, however, not immediately accepted as a new outer head of the order. The translation of Liber al vel Legis, or the Book of the Law, into German in 1925 was a watershed, and some dissidents were won over, while others were totally repulsed by the contents of the book. In time, the rituals and ideology of the old OTO were Thelemized under Crowley's influence, and finally Baphomet, Crowley's OTO by name, was more or less established as the international outer head of the order. Besides the OTO, there was another group working in Germany in 1925 that had attracted Crowley's attention, the Pansophical Lodge, or Pansophia. This lodge, headed by Heinrich Tronker, was originally founded as a loosely organized study group in Berlin shortly after the First World War. To complicate matters, Roos had given Tronker a charter for the OTO in Germany and one to H. Spencer Lewis. Lewis formed the ancient and mystical Order Rosicrucius, AMORC, and Tronker's group soon became formalized as the Grand Pansophical Lodge of Germany, Orient, Berlin. The Grand Master of this lodge was Master Pacitus Albin Grau, and its secretary was Gregor A. Gregorius, or Eugene Grosch. Another important initiate of this lodge was Karl Germer, who was also the paid personal secretary of Heinrich Tronker. Tronker, a dealer in books and rare manuscripts, was the head of a whole electric occult pansophical movement or network made up of several orders, lodges, and societies. Only some of his authority was derived from Theodore Roos, at least according to Aleister Crowley's own account. It was from contact between this group and Crowley that the Fraternitas Saturni, under the grand mastery of Gregor A. Gregorius, came to be founded in 1926. These affairs will be addressed later. Finally, with regard to the quasi-Masonic background of the FS, these are the supposed German origins of Die Golden Dämmerung, or the Golden Dawn. This magical order was founded in England in 1888. Its tradition holds that its authority was derived from a German order of the same name. Ellic Howe was carefully thrown a good deal of doubt on the whole idea of a German origin of the organization in his Magicians of the Golden Dawn. He contends that W. W. Westcott essentially forged documents relevant to this tradition. Howe's arguments in this regard make a great deal of sense. An interesting question that remains is why Westcott would have chosen Germany as a source of his imaginary lodge. On the surface, the explanation seems reasonable that Germany was suitably remote, yet at the same time plausible, at least more plausible than the subterranean Himalayas. The specific choice of Germany rather than France, Italy, or Russia perhaps originated in the more mysterious reputation that Germany, as compared to other places, had among the English. Germany was the ultimate source of the English nation. Germany was the original home of the Rosicrucian movement. Germany was the source of the current royal house of England, and Germany was the spiritual cradle of Romanticism. An additional contributing historical factor may have been the traditional presence of so-called superior incogniti, or secret chiefs, in the German Masonic order of the stricte observance, strict observance, which had been active since the mid-18th century. Howe speculates that Westcott did not have the secret chiefs in mind so much as he did the hidden Mahatmas of Blavatsky's Theosophical Society. This may have well been the case, but there were sufficiently deep and long-term network-like connections between the German and English Masonic and quasi-Masonic groups to warrant the idea that these secret chiefs were thought to be akin to those of the stricte observance. As a feature of organization and doctrine, this concept is roughly reflected in the FS as a GOTOS entity, the superhuman Saturnian demiurge and guiding force of the order, which is embodied in the 33rd degree. Whatever the origin of the idea of the secret chiefs, it cannot be denied that the founding and development of the Theosophical Society had a transformative effect on the history of occult movements in Western society. The Theosophical Society was founded in New York in 1875, and its influence was felt throughout the occult subculture from that time on, mainly in the popularization of occult ideas of the West and the East, and in the electric synthesis of these ideas into a more or less coherent whole. Theosophy was introduced into the German-speaking world in the late 1870s by the Viennese figure of Friedrich Eckstein, and by 1884 it had been officially established in Germany. At about that time, a high official of the Theosophical Society in Adyar, India, Dr. Franz Hartmann, made a trip to Germany where he met Karl Kellner and became involved with him in occult work of the kind mentioned above. Here there is a definite early connection between a leading Theosophist and the future outer head of the OTO. Later, of course, Hartmann would be one of the leading figures of the German OTO, along with Klein and Roos. Another Theosophist, Rudolf Steiner, also had OTO connections. Theodor Roos gave Steiner a charter to found an OTO lodge in Berlin around 1906, while Steiner was General Secretary of the Theosophical Society in Germany. In all of this, there is evidence that the world of quasi-Masonry in Germany was open to theosophical ideas and that individual theosophists were also seeking deeper, practical, magical applications of occult teachings in the ranks of the quasi-Masonic magical orders. The most important single figure in the general Arasophy movement was Guido List. From an early point in his career, he was active in the theosophical milieu as well as in the Volksschule in occult circles. In the 1890s, he was involved with Viennese Literary Society, which included personalities such as Rudolf Steiner and Georg Lanz von Liebenfels. List himself was the son of a wealthy Viennese tradesman, but his talents and desires ran more to the literary and the occult. He eventually succeeded in winning a place for himself as a poet, novelist, and playwright within the largely establishment-oriented Volksreich circles of Austria. Beginning in 1902, however, List gave vent to his mystical inclinations and embarked on a path of an occult master. In that year, he underwent an operation for cataracts, after which his eyes were bandaged for 11 months. In this prolonged state of blindness and darkness, List was enlightened with regard to the runic mysteries. 2 years later, List wrote his first occult study, The Secret of the Runes. The Arasophical and runic occultism of the FS is ultimately derived from this basic text and several of List's other studies, along with the magical work of subsequent authors inspired by those studies, such as Friedrich Bernhard Marby and Siegfried Adolf Kummer. In the FS, Frater Emeritus Karl Speisberger was one of the leading exponents of rune magic. Examples of his runic ideas as expressed in FS publications are provided in the third revised and expanded edition of the book Rune Might. Another area of esoteric interest that burst upon the scene in early 20th century Germany was astrology. Up until around that time of the First World War, astrology had been just one of the many arcane sciences practiced within the mysto-magical cultural milieu of quasi-Masonry. Theosophy and Arasophy. By the 1920s, however, astrology had become more popular in Germany than any other branch of occultism. The application of astrology in the FS extends to the most esoteric levels of the subject and the order's doctrines concerning the Aquarian and Saturno-Uranian age. The attraction of widespread interest for a lodge with obvious astrological implications is also clearly a reflection of the popularization of astrology in Central Europe during the 1920s. Between the two world wars, Germany was a land of extreme contradictions. This was the time of the Weimar Republic. The capital city of Old German Empire was Berlin, a city that was during this time period a dynamic cultural epicenter of new and exciting trends. Berlin was home to the burgeoning German film industry. It was also a hothouse of what we today would call alternative lifestyle movements. Radical pursuits in culture, sexuality, religion, and politics were nurtured and developed not as part of any plan, but rather as a side effect of chaos mixed with a highly educated and creative population. This world is wonderfully depicted in Professor Mel Gordon's book, Voluptuous Panic, The Erotic World of Weimar Berlin. It was within the context of these major streams of culture and occultism that the Pansophical Lodge, led by Master Rechnardus, or Heinrich Tranker, existed, and from which the Fraternitas Saturni would grow. Pansophia can be characterized as a disorganized movement overseen by Tranker, who, like Theodore Roos, engineered a number of occult groups. As noted earlier, Tronker is even supposed to have derived his Masonic authority from Roos. In its early phase, the Pansophical Society was a study group founded in Berlin just after the Great War. Its areas of interest included Gnosticism, the ancient mysteries of Greece, Egypt, and Babylon, as well as problems of philosophy, religious history, metaphysics, psychology, cosmosophy, and Kabbalah. In the early 1920s, Tronker founded a Collegium Pansophicium. This organization, which may have existed only on paper, gave Tronker's occult works a more Masonic, orderly cast, and acted as a background for the publication of some of Tronker's other occult works. Tronker, like Grosch, was an occult book dealer who probably found it much to his advantage to encourage widespread interest in every avenue of occultism. In 1921, all of the Pansophical streams governed by Tronker were brought together in the Grand Pansophical Lodge of the Orient, Berlin. In general, there seems to have been a good deal of occult involvement among German filmmakers in the pre-1933 era. Some of the mysteries of this milieu might have yet to be completely unraveled. Grau studied art at the Kunststein in Dresden and served in the German army on the Eastern Front in World War I. After the war, he worked in the film industry in Berlin and as a commercial artist. From early on, he was interested in esotericism and established a group called the Brothers Who Seek the Light. In 1921, he founded a company called Prana Film, and with F.W. Murnau as director, he produced Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, which released in 1922. The film is full of references to occult knowledge. Legal actions brought forth by the widow of Bram Stoker on the basis of copyright infringement regarding his husband's famous novel Dracula caused severe financial problems for Grau's company. In 1921, Grau produced his masterpiece, Schatten, for his new company, Pan Film. This film was released in the English-speaking market as Warning Shadows. In 1924, the legal settlement with Miss Stroker mandated the destruction of all prints of Nosferatu. Thankfully, some survived. The legal matters ruined Grau financially, and he more or less retired from the film industry and devoted himself to esoteric matters. In 1925, Grau became leader of the Lodge Pansophia and would later collaborate on the internal FS journal Saturn Gnosis. He also wrote a Thelemic book called Liber I, the Book of the Zero Hour. During World War II, Grau was a technical draftsman and was involved in military transport. After the war, he lived in Basregel, a small town in Upper Bavaria, until his death in 1971. There he became well-known for paintings of the spectacular local landscape, and he entered the Swiss OTO shortly before his death. Reports that he died in a concentration camp in 1942 or that he immigrated to Switzerland have been proven unreliable. Finally, there was Eugene Grosch, who was initiated by Tronker and given the lodge name of Gregor A. Gregorius. Gregorius was the actual founder of the Pansophical Lodge and also served as its general secretary. At the time, Gregorius also ran an occult bookshop in Berlin called Iviha, which also contained a meeting space for the order. Grosch was born to a family of modest economic means in Germany and was a recipient of only the most basic education. In 1911, he moved to Berlin. His early professional work there involved the production and publications for industrial films. He married in 1914 and had a daughter who he named Alrune, after the figure in 1911 Hans Heinz Ewer's novel. During World War I, he was a non-commissioned officer in the Army Medical Service. In the summer of 1925, the most important event leading to the emergence of the FS took place. Without apparently knowing very much about his teachings, Master Rickenardus invited Aleister Crowley to his house in Weida in Thuringia, Germany. The purpose of this meeting was to confer the leadership of the groups controlled by Tronker onto Crowley, or so it was in Crowley's mind. After Theodore Roos died in 1923, the international leadership of the OTO passed to Crowley in England. Crowley had been an initiate of the Golden Dawn from 1898 to 1900. In 1904, while in Cairo, Egypt, Crowley received a revelatory book that was transmitted to him by a praetor-human entity calling itself Iwas. This text, Liber al Veliges, is also known more simply as the Book of the Law. After the reception of the book, Crowley eventually began to function as a magus and proclaimed a new aeon with the new word thelema, or true will. Crowley's direct inspiration for the idea of thelema appears to have been from the French writer François Rabelais, who coined the phrase, "do what thou wilt," and wrote of an Abbé de Theleme in Gargantua and Pantagruel, although Crowley's fundamentally interprets the philosophy of Rabelais. The influence of Friedrich Nietzsche on Crowley was also significant, both in terms of Crowley's style and as regards to the substance and theology of thelema. The German philosopher's concept of the will to power was echoing through all of Europe by 1900. The law of thelema was summed up in the formula, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," to which the obligatory response became, "Love is the law, love under will." All of this constituted the law of thelema, which one either accepted or rejected. During the ensuing decade, Crowley worked on trying to develop his own magical order, the Argenteum Astrum, or Silver Star. This order was theoretically constructed in 1907 and announced publicly in the first issue of the Equinox. However, this institutional instrument apparently proved to some extent unsatisfactory to Crowley in his plan for the dissemination of his new Ionic law. When Crowley met Theodore Roos in London in 1912, the great beast found another suitable institution in the form of the OTO. Roos made Crowley the head of the order in Great Britain and Ireland at that time. Crowley took the magical name Baphomet for his elevation to the 10th degree, the highest degree in the OTO, had to bestow at that time. The secret of the OTO is, as we know, the practice of sexual magic and mysticism. Crowley had, up until this time, partially understood such things, but with the reception of the OTO teachings on this subject, he began to delve into such practices almost exclusively. From 1912 until 1922, when Roos suffered a stroke and retired from active participation in the order, there was a sense of collaboration between Baphomet and Merlin, or Roos. Crowley received the innermost magical secrets of the order, and Roos had Crowley revise the rituals of the OTO in a form that accorded with the law of thelema. Roos apparently named Crowley to succeed him as OHO, but there was substantial resistance to this among members of the German OTO. It must be said that Baphomet, or Crowley, rapidly spread both the OTO and his word thelema in the English-speaking world through his own contracts and by means of the Equinox, which he began to print OTO-related material after 1912. In the wake of Merlin's death in 1923, things moved inevitably to a crisis point. All indications are that the German branch of the OTO came under the control of Heinrich Tranker after the death of Roos. This was perhaps due to the fact that Crowley's teachings were not universally acclaimed in Germany. The lack of acceptance stemmed both from Crowley's doctrine of the new aeon, documentation of which had not yet appeared in German, and from Crowley's veiled references in his writings to the secret of the 11th degree, which is sexual magic. The German branches generally guarded this secret closely and only partially revealed it at the 8th degree, where the secrets of solitary sex magic were taught. Without being specific, Crowley had divulged too much of this secret to persons unprepared for such mysteries. When the overall picture of Germany at this time is assessed in retrospect, it is clear that there is a split between those enthusiastic about Crowley's teachings and those highly suspicious of them. It was into this set of circumstances that Crowley moved during the fateful summer of 1925, traveling with an entourage consisting of Leah Herzig, Dorothy Olsen, and Norman Mudd. He left from Paris to go to the home of Heinrich Tranker in Weida. It was actually Karl Germer who paid for their trip to Germany. Crowley had already sent a copy of the Book of the Law ahead to Weida, where it was promptly translated into German. The Weida Conference, as it became known, was attended by Crowley, his entourage, Heinrich Tranker, and his wife Helen, Albin Grau, Eugene Grosch, Karl Germer, Martha Kunzel, and a few other leaders. The purpose of the conference was the acceptance or rejection of the law of thelema and the exploration of the possibility of uniting several occult factions under the leadership of the New World teacher, the Great Wild Beast 666, or Crowley. Accounts of the conference vary in detail, scope, and conclusion. Certainly the most assuming one is written by Crowley himself. None of the accounts can be completely trusted, as each writer has some sort of axe to grind, but subsequent historical facts allow us to reconstruct the real outcome of this occult conclave. To begin with, the translation of the Book of the Law into German caused quite a stir. Both Grau and Schrenker were ill-disposed toward its bombastically anti-Christian stance. Rechnardus, supposed to have later softened his criticism and come to some new understanding of the book's contents, but Tacitus remained opposed, if tacitly. On the other hand, as subsequent events were to show, Gregorius was favorably impressed with the beast and his word. The conference ended with an obviously uneasy communique entitled The Testament of a Seeker, the text of which stated, quote, "The teacher of the world, whose appearance was predicted for this year, and who has been awaited by all true seekers, and especially by those of the Theosophical Society, has appeared at this exact time in the person of To Megatherion, i.e. Aleister Crowley. We, the undersigned, have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears, and we know certainly and without lies that he is in truth the transmitter of the word after which the soul of humanity thirsts." End quote. There are rumors that Grau made a documentary film of the events of the White Conference and Crowley's sojourn in Germany at that time. Unfortunately, no concrete evidence exists or has ever surfaced. Subsequent events in the wake of the so-called White Conference show just how uneasy this agreement was. Tronker and Grau renounced all the communique immediately after the meeting, and eventually even Mudd and Leah Herzig withdrew their support. For his part, however, Gregorius must have been studying and assimilating Crowley's teachings in the months and years that followed, along with those of the Pansophists, Rosicrucians, and others in his environs. In 1926, on Maundy Thursday, the Pansophical Lodge was ritually closed and dissolved. The following May 5th, 5 fraters founded the Fraternitas Saturni, and this was to be a magical order that accepted the law of Thelema, but existed totally independently of any other esoteric organization. A few days later, Gregorius wrote to the beast informing him of the aims of his revived Saturnian lodge. The letter and the document outlining these early aims are printed here in appendices F and G. As far as the Rosicrucian Pansophical Lodge factions and its leaders were concerned, there seems to be a falling out over, among other things, the treatment of Crowley. It is rumored that Tronker had a hand in having Crowley expelled from Germany. This was apparently one of the critical events leading up to the final dissolution of the Pansophical Lodge in 1926. Tronker's whole way of leadership within the occult world was radically different from that of Crowley. Tronker was content to plant seeds and allow individuals and even groups to grow in their own ways, whereas Crowley was a visionary magus on a mission to influence the world according to the meaning of his word and the philosophy it represented. It is not by accident that the Pansophical Lodge was closed and the Fraternitas Saturni established immediately thereafter. Both Tronker and Grau continued in their own occult work, and in theory Tronker remained the head of the OTO in Germany until his death in 1958. A full one-third of the members of the Pansophical Lodge became the core initiates of the FS. Between May 1926 and Easter Saturday 1928, the FS was further consolidated and refined into a more cohesive structure. The later day in 1928 actually served as the date of the official magical inception of the FS. After this, there followed a period of intense activity for the newly founded FS, especially in the environs of Berlin, where Gregorius had his Geneva bookshop. He began publishing FS material, some of which was available to the public and some of which was restricted to only within the lodge. 5 issues of the journal Saturnosis were printed between 1928 and 1930. In this journal, articles on magical subjects by Gregorius and other writers within and without the FS appeared. There was also a series of 10 magical papers which had been previously published between 1926 through 1928. Some of these texts were supposedly translated from English and ostensibly written by To Megatherion or Crowley. However, it seems more likely that they were written by Gregorius or other FS initiates, as they often bear little resemblance to Crowley's typical work. Finally, in this period, Gregorius produced a series of 14 printed lectures of the Lodge School, as well as other internal documents for initiatory instruction. Many of these works were published by the Lodge's own imprint, Aniva. Much of this material was later reprinted in the monthly Lodge Journal, Papers Toward the Applied Occult Art Life, 1950 through 1963. The relationship between Crowley and his orders, the AA and the OTO, and Gregorius and the FS was an ambivalent one. Gregorius had made it quite plain that although he accepted the law of Thelema, he would accept no official relationship with Crowley or his organizations. On the whole, it seems that Gregorius claimed a closer link with Crowley and his work than actually ever existed. FS materials, doctrines, and rituals, as can be seen in this book, are only laced with Crowleyan ideas. Their shape and substance remain something other than what the beast promulgated. There was some contact between Crowley and Gregorius between the years 1928 and 33, and there were some opportunities for meetings. Crowley was in Germany in 29 when he married his wife, and on different occasions in 1930 he was in Berlin during some rather frantic affairs. It does not appear that Crowley ever met personally with Gregorius again after the Weida Conference. Most of his influence on Gregorius came through published works, many of which were translated into German by initiates of the FS. The actual accomplishments of Gregorius in the FS was a more or less cohesive yet eclectic synthesis of ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Luciferianism, astrological mythology, Crowleyanity or Thelemism, sexual magical practices of the old OTO, various Indian yogi systems, and medieval and modern doctrines of alchemy and ritual magic. This diverse base of ideas was enhanced by the great number of initiates who joined the FS over the years from other backgrounds such as Masonry, Pan-Sophia, Rosicrucianism, Ariosophy, Aidonism, Kabbalah, Yoga, OTO, Spiritualism, Astrology, and Gnosticism. The great storm cloud began to break over the Fraternitas Saturni and all their other Masonic and quasi-Masonic lodges in Germany on January 30th, 1933, when Adolf Hitler, Führer of the Neststadt, or the National Society, the Nazi Party, took the oath as Chancellor of the nation. By the next month, emergency powers had been invoked, and many groups thought to be of a subversive nature, from communists to Masons, were suppressed. This began a process in which secret societies, occult orders of almost every kind began to be systematically suppressed. Most sources on the history of the FS state that the lodge was closed and banned in 1933. In 1935, another wave of voluntary dissolutions of secret societies followed. In 1936, Gregorius's library was seized by the Gestapo, and he left Germany for Switzerland to avoid further trouble with the authorities. Finally, in a declaration of the Reichsführer SS, Heinrich Himmler, in 1937, all occult and quasi-Masonic organizations, even the Bolshevik ones, some of which had generally and originally been supportive of National Socialist aims, were banned. The list of banned groups included those founded by Guido von List and Lanz van Liebenfels. As for Gregorius, he eventually made his way from Switzerland to Canaro, Italy. There he remained until October of 1943, when he was arrested and extradited back to Germany under pressure from the Nazi government. He was held for a period in jail in Leipzig, but released on his own recognizance after only 1 year. His release was helped along due to an old personal esoteric relationship with a certain local Nazi official. He was allowed to continue his occult studies after his release. Toward the end of the war, he was actually in the service of the government himself as a police constable. But as the war ended and the country was in collapse, he escaped to his old home Riesa and eventually ended up in the nearby city of Dresden. There he became a councilman in charge of cultural affairs. Since he was in the Soviet occupation zone, he was also obliged to join the Communist Party. And we'll end chapter 1 here. There's a brief foray into the history of the Fraternitas Saturni. I hope you guys enjoyed that. soon on Patreon, I'll have the book club set up where we can read and discuss the book in its entirety and have a general discussion. And I'll take recommendations and we can go on this journey together. Thank you for joining me, and like, share, subscribe if you want to learn more. Awesome. Thank you.